Okay, so I wanted to leave it on this slide to remind us that we'd been talking about mindfulness, meditations, and trying to be present in the moment. And that wraps up our Salovey, our Salovey model, so that we have these four components all feeding into emotional intelligence. Now, I still feel like we only have a vague kind of concept about any of this, and that's a problem. But that's a problem in psychology in general, right? We have a lot of concepts and we have to develop ways to try and measure them, and they're just operational definitions. So I don't think that's unique to emotional intelligence. Let's talk about some myths about emotional intelligence. Myth one. Hopefully, I've already clarified that emotional intelligence is not clearly defined. We have lots of operational definitions for what it means to be just the definition of emotional intelligence, let alone the factors that contribute to it. So that is a myth. It is not a well-defined concept, that's for sure. Myth two, good psychometric support emotional intelligence. That's, in case you're not familiar with what that sentence means, the idea that we have good evidence from validity studies and reliability studies that the concept of emotional intelligence is well defined by the surveys or scales that we use to measure it, and that's not true. We're not. I put here questionable validity. We're not even sure if those scales measure emotional intelligence because we're not sure what emotional intelligence is. So that's a myth that we have good psychometrics. Myth three, that it is something that's separate from personality. That no, there is so much correlation between the big five traits and then emotional intelligence that it's possible that emotional intelligence is really just sort of like a repackaging of big five traits. It's possible. Myth four, emotional intelligence ability tests are as good as cognitive tests. No, there's no evidence that they're validly measuring emotional intelligence. Whereas there is at least evidence of validity on cognitive tests. Cognitive tests you can at least compare to other measures of cognition and put it together, and we have a pretty strong guess. I don't want to say guess, I want to say pretty strong basis for our belief that cognitive IQ tests or intelligence tests really tap into what they're claiming to tap into. And we don't see that with the EI yet. EI is to emotion as IQ is to intelligence. Probably not, because EI does not link to emotion in the way that IQ links to intelligence. The model that I just went through, Salovey and colleagues, we don't really see a single entity kind of interpretation that this all is one big thing called emotional intelligence. Instead, we had four components that relate to this concept of emotional intelligence. Whereas with IQ, we have very clear markers that intelligent behavior is tied to scores on IQ tests. So it's a little bit different. EI predicts adaptive coping. It's simplistic to say that any single factor determines how you cope with challenges or how you cope with your emotions or how you cope with life. It's very simplistic to say that all you need is one thing and everything's going to become easy or whatever. It's too simplistic. It can't possibly be true because it's never one thing in human behavior, is it? It's always some constellation of factors. And so it can't be that EI is the one thing. EI is critical for success. If you take cognitive tests, they're the best predictor of any metric of success that we have. Success in school, success at work, success in relationships. That doesn't seem like cognitive tests would go together with that, but they do. Personality, great predictor. The big five traits, each of them, well, for sure, like conscientiousness predicts job success. Conscientiousness also is associated with relationship success. Like different traits are associated with different kinds of outcomes, but personality is a better predictor than emotional intelligence is. Certainly not, EI isn't critical for success. Just think, some pretty successful people who don't seem to have much emotional intelligence, don't you? I think that's a really good way to say it can't be critical. It can't be required for success when personally people who don't have great emotional intelligence and are successful. So, successful intelligence. Let's get into a different model. Okay, so successful intelligence, according to this model, is based on academic intelligence, creativity, and practical intelligence. Okay, so this is kind of interesting, right? This idea that there might be three components to the type of intelligence that's associated with success. And a lot of this has focused so far on success in college because the person who founded this model really thinks we should get rid of tests such as SAT and other measures like that, and instead administer something that would tap into these three components of intelligence. I think in the long run, he'd like to apply it to workplace settings and other kinds of things as well. But right now he's kind of focusing on academic settings. All right, so I gave you, no, I didn't. This is a different thing. I'm sorry. So Alice is a good student, always getting good grades until she reached graduate school. Required to come up with original ideas, Alice began to fall behind. Barbara is not such a good student, but she's brimming over with ideas for research. Celia is neither a good nor a creative student, but she's street smart. She knows how to play the game, how to get things done. All right, so we have three different people with three different kinds of intelligence according to this model. Now, this is a simplistic example where we've got three different people and they each are excelling in different types of intelligence. Typically, if you're going to grad school, you take a graduate record exam to make sure that you have the academic intelligence that you need to be able to succeed in grad school. But one of the things that Sternberg, who founded this idea of, he calls it triarchic theory of intelligence because there's three components. One of the things that he argues is that, yeah, you need academic intelligence so that you can get through the classes and stuff, but you need creativity in order to do well in the research side of it, because you need, as a graduate student, to come up with your own novel research and make a mark on your field. So you need creativity. So he's arguing that especially in grad school admissions, when we focus too hard on academic success, we're ignoring that creativity component. So Barbara is not such a good student, but she's brimming over with ideas for research. So she's got the creativity, but she may struggle in her classes if she doesn't have, the ability to struggle through and, do well enough in the classes that she can pass them. And then Celia isn't very creative, isn't very academically oriented, but she can get stuff done. So again, she may struggle in her classes unless she can get stuff done, like maybe get a really good study group together where she can learn from everybody else in a way that actually allows her to get through the classes and pass them. Maybe she's not creative enough to come up with her own research idea that's, going to make a mark on the field, but maybe she knows, maybe she's got really great practical intelligence that allows her to collaborate with a classmate and get ideas from them, and maybe they end up collaborating on research, and maybe Celia is going to spend her entire career collaborating with other people and helping to bring their vision to fruition, because a lot of times people who have really good ideas don't know how to bring it to fruition, get grant money, recruit students to work in the lab, and all the other things that it takes. Maybe Celia would be really good at that part. So what Sternberg argues with this model is that each of these three types of intelligence are important. Each of them are important. And what we've historically overemphasized is the academic side. And he's saying we need to take into consideration all three of these components. So Sternberg says there are different ways to be smart. There's the academic, there's the creative, and there's the practical. He says that each of these three types of intelligence is independent from the others. So you can be high in academic achievement and lower in the other two, or you could be high in two of them and low in one. You could be high in all of them relative to other people, right? You could have them in equal measure, but they're independent of each other. You don't have to have them all. And so maybe you know somebody perhaps that has really good academic intelligence. They really do well in school. They can answer test questions really well. And maybe they've got great creativity. And so they come up with good novel solutions to problems, and they're just really good in that area. But maybe they are low in practical intelligence. So maybe they have trouble with their hygiene, or they have trouble figuring out where to park their car, or like just very simple things. They maybe have difficulty with directions, things like that. So what he's arguing is that you can have varied amounts of these types of intelligence. It's not one monolithic thing. And so as a result, it's worth measuring them all. So here are some examples of this idea that the different intelligences are independent of each other. So we have milk plant workers mentally determined the best stacking strategy. So determining the best stacking strategy might be an example of creativity, right? Coming up with a novel solution to a problem. Might be a little kind of academic also, like maybe they have some spatial ability in there that has to do with maybe what we would call maybe geometry, but not because they studied it necessarily, but because they have like sort of an innate sense of that kind of thing. And maybe they have a little bit of practical intelligence that's like, okay, well, clearly we need to figure out how to get these things stacked better so we can have more floor space. So maybe there's a mixture of things going on here. Racetrack handicappers apply a complex algorithm to help them to decide who to bet on, right? Or who to tell other, how to set like how much should pay out if this horse wins versus that horse. That complex algorithm, that feels very academic. That feels like academic intelligence, but they're not usually doing it in a mathematical way necessarily. They might be doing it more intuitively. Grocery shoppers quickly select the best deal. Again, you might be trying to decide, should I buy this package or that package? And very quickly you can figure out how much it costs per ounce, or what's the likelihood that I will end up wasting most of this because the box is too big and I won't get through it all before it goes bad, or like what's the best deal, right? Probably a little academic, trying to do the math on what it costs per ounce. Probably a little bit of practical as you're realizing, well, this one costs less per ounce, but what's the probability I'm actually going to consume all of this before it goes bad? So a little bit of both. How about the Brazilian street kids who display math skills in street vending, but when they are put into school, they can't do any math? What's going on there? Again, that's really high practical intelligence, but it also probably is a little bit of academic intelligence that's manifesting itself on the street, and given a different context, the classroom, totally novel prompts and cues, it's not working for them. So these are different kinds of intelligences that have been displayed by different kinds of people in different kinds of situations. And Sternberg has looked at them and said these are all intelligent people who have come up with, solutions that are either academically good or creatively good or practical intelligence good. These are all kind of evidence of like what we call tacit knowledge. These are people who they're not meaning to apply something academic. They're not meaning to like apply a rule or something. They just have a feel for what they're doing, right? It just sort of implicitly comes out. Sternberg labeled that tacit knowledge. It's something that you have inside of yourself, but you don't know how come you know to do it. I don't know if I'm describing that very well. So this is what I thought was coming up on the last slide. This is what I had you do, and you are the first group that I'm trying this on, so hopefully it went well. And I gave you different prompts in your groups to discuss. And so I'm going to make a separate video based on what you actually did with your sticky notes on the whiteboard and see what kinds of solutions your groups came up. So that's going to be a separate video in the playlist. that I'll stick in there once I have your data back for that. So I'm going to go ahead and skip over that for now, but that's where that fits in. The deadline for submitting that is before this week. So hopefully if you're watching these videos, you have already done the sticky note activity. Wise answers will rely on basic factual knowledge. So we're finally getting into wisdom. I've been talking about emotional intelligence this whole time, a little bit of like Sternberg intelligence. We're finally to wisdom, finally. So wise answers are going to take basic factual knowledge into account. So they're going to look at the scope of the issue, the depth of the issue, the emotions that might be involved. And so as you solved those problems that I posed for your group, there were things that you had to consider, and hopefully you had some basic factual things that you focused on. Strategic knowledge, right? So you have to weigh the costs of different actions, benefits of different actions, the timing, and these like should I be doing it now? Like one of the problems involved a 15-year-old wanting to get married. Is this the best time, right? Or are there factors that would say if you were to wait, there might be a better outcome? Things like that. That's strategic knowledge. Lifespan context. So when we have a wise answer, we have a person who considers the past, the current, the future contexts that are going to have an impact on this decision or are going to be impacted by this decision. So past things are going to impact the decision. Things that are going on right now are going to impact the decision and be impacted by the decision. And future things are going to be impacted. And so a wise person takes all of that into consideration. Like, what's your track record? Why are you in this position right now? What's going on in the current situation that's making you think that this might be a good decision? What might be happening in the future that would make this decision seem good or bad? What impacts would this decision right now have on your future outcomes? Like, these all need to be sort of taken into consideration. Value relativism looks at the fact that you may not have the same values that I do. So as the person who's giving advice, I may have different things that I'm focusing on than the person who's actually making the decision, right? So as a person who's been brought in to be the wisdom, I have to acknowledge that what you value needs to be taken into consideration. What is a priority for you needs to be taken into. I can't come in and just tell you what to do. I can't come in and say, well, it worked for me when I was your age, you should do that too. We can't. That's not a wise answer. That's kind of a self-serving answer. So value relativism is our acknowledgement that it's important to consider what the actual decision maker, the actual actor, values and what their priorities are. And then the management of uncertainty is part of wisdom. I mean, this is probably, as a younger person, the thing that makes an older person seem the most wise is their ability to deal in the shades of gray of life, right? When we're younger, we want things to be right or wrong, good or bad, right? Should I do it or shouldn't I do it? As we have more experience in life, we start to realize, well, neither one of them is a great choice. Neither one of them is a terrible choice. So now we're in uncertainty. Now we have to go back and maybe talk about values and priorities. Maybe we have to go into depth to think about, okay, so if we were to make this choice right now, what implications is that going to have down the road? What are the costs and the benefits about, right? So you have to dwell in that uncertainty to be a truly wise decision maker. And that's probably, in my opinion, one of the hardest parts. And I feel like it becomes easier with age, but that might just be because more things become gray with age. You start to realize nothing is true or false in life. Everything is maybe. I remember when I was a student and I would ask a professor a question and they would start their answer with, well, I always knew I was going to get this sort of, well, it depends. Sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that. And I always hated that. It's like, just tell me what the answer is. Now that I'm on the professor side, I oftentimes start my answers with, well, because now I recognize how uncertain things are. And so part of that is experience, right? So that leaves us with wisdom. Let's go ahead and take a break here, and we will come back and wrap up wisdom.